red wave that's coming is going to be like the elevator doors opening up in The Shining. That's what I think. I think people are just like, what the fuck are you saying? They're making Republicans.
I don't know how they're doing it.
And Cale Brooks. Let's get that off since I fucked that up. Hello, David and Cale.
What's up, Matt?
I just realized I left Cale off of the intro.
I'm in-house guest. That's all.
Yeah, the in-house guest that's not worthy of the respect of putting on the graphic design. Cale Brooks, also David Griscom. Hello, David. How are you?
Oh, man. I'm good, man. Just, for folks who don't know Cale, you should. Cale's a good friend of ours personally, a good friend of the show, leftist media creator, just all around, I don't know, insightful fella. So we're very happy to have him on. And just a little bit, we'll be joined by Emma Vigeland as well. I figured this is a pretty good brain trust to break down what happened last night in the 2022 midterms.
Yeah, a night where everyone across the political spectrum, from Joe Rogan to Colin Cowherd, were predicting a red wave. I still think there's maybe a little bit of triumphalism. It looked like Lauren Boebert was for sure going to lose. I'm not sure where that's at. That's like within 100 votes. I think the last I saw, with like 97% of the vote in. And I'm still that weasel, Blake Masters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried that he'll be able to close the gap in Arizona. But it wasn't a red wave. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't know where you guys want to start with this conversation, but like, I'm happy to see Kasar and Lee in Congress. I think like it would have been nice. If the Democrats don't have the House, and maybe this is a little bit naive, but if Democrats don't have the House, whether they have the Senate or not, like I think judges are the main thing there. But like, I'll take a slightly swelled ranks of the sort of progressive flank of Congress out of a night that I was expecting, frankly, as somebody who still has trauma from 2016 doing live broadcasting of these things and doesn't like to do it, even though I know people like to watch live election coverage. I was expecting a much more miserable night, particularly as the early returns came in.
Well, I think before we jump into all this, we do have to start with one of the gurus of the program. Because people are asking us to make a lot of predictions. I don't like making predictions too much. And this has become my mantra, I think, when it comes to making any kind of electoral positions. This is Donald Trump just the other day.
You've endorsed more than 330 candidates this election cycle. Tonight, win or lose, the results for Republicans, how much of that will be because of Donald Trump?
Well, I think if they win, I should get all the credit. And if they lose, I should not be blamed at all, okay? But it'll probably be just the opposite. When they win, I think they're going to do very well. I'll probably be given very little credit, even though in many cases I told people to run. And they ran, and they turned out to be very good candidates. They've turned out to be very good candidates. But usually what would happen is when they do well, I won't be given any credit. And if they do badly, they will blame everything on me. So I'm prepared for anything, but we'll defend ourselves.
And as a commentator, I feel the same way. When I'm right, I don't get any of the credit. And when I'm wrong, I just get so many haters in my inbox.
I agree. I think that's right.
But this is... Go ahead. No, this is has been an interesting night, because I'll say on my end, obviously, I'm very honed in on Texas, and we're going to talk in depth about that a little bit later. But it felt like a very, very bad night, just on that level. So I don't know. I was having this kind of regional despair, seeing a lot of other people come out and say oh, this actually wasn't, this was a pretty decent night, if not a good one. And I think it's also important too, to separate out CNN commentators, what they're talking about being a good night versus people on the left.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think that does betray a little bit of regionalism. I'm excited about Ilhan crushing. It's a Republican. The primary is really the problem for her. But the upper Midwest did fairly well. Would have been nice if Mandela Barnes could have beat Ron Johnson. That would have made it an unqualifiably really good night. Also, North Dakota voted against legalizing marijuana, which is dumb as hell. But But yeah, South Dakota said Medicaid expansion. So like, I think the upper Midwest is maybe better than the South.
I mean, how are you feeling, Cale? I mean, I know there's a lot of different narratives, but if you were to just give like your general take on 2022 midterms, like how are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, so far the Jacobin take, I guess, that I guess I can kind of uphold somewhat. I mean, the Jacobin take so far has been basically this was a bad night for Democrats, but Republicans undoubtedly lost in the sense that like they were expecting a far better outcome than what they got. But I also think we should just be upfront in saying that this was a loss for Democrats, obviously, like insofar as they've lost the House, most likely, and it's still possible that they're going to lose the Senate. So the fact that it's like another situation like 2020 where, you know, Warnock might, you know, we might all be trying to get Warnock elected in Georgia, and that's going to be the 50-50 Senate split again. I mean, it's like ridiculous in some sense that like the Democrats continue to not have any real kind of like progressive vision of the future. There's no kind of, you know, and a lot of this was, you know, I think there was, you know, some of the polling, the actual like polling leading up to the election, the exit polling, people were saying there's some contradiction there, some differences. On the one hand, you know, it seems like for the most part, most Americans are like dealing with and most focused on the economy, like in basically every single election, and inflation. And there was subsequent polling early in the year saying that most people understood that inflation was something driven by corporations and by the wealthy, and how that works out, you know, everyone kind of has their own understanding. But the fact that like most people, I think it was a plurality of people were saying that inflation is being driven by corporations, should be great news. The problem is that probably most people who voted, and like this is what the exit polling says, most people who voted on inflation voted for Republicans. That it was more of the social issues, and the Republicans, I think we can probably clearly say and definitively say that like the Republicans overstep on Roe v. Wade over the summer was effective in mobilizing people to come out to vote. Still not really enough to like actually have any kind of forward momentum. This was still a step back for the Democrats, who effectively got hardly anything done under Biden's first 2 years. And what they did get done with the Inflation Reduction Act was such like, it was such a nothing burger in kind of effective popular politics that the Democrats really couldn't even come up with a coherent argument to deal with inflation right now. That Republicans said, you guys just voted to increase spending, which is what's driving inflation. And Democrats, who basically have the same theory of inflation as like the Fed, and Republicans more or less, that this is demand-driven inflation, said, yeah, but there's good things coming. You're going to get something good in the future. And like, I mean, you can't trust Republicans because look what they did with the courts. Yeah. And so I think like that mixture, which like effectively maybe blunted a red wave, also simultaneously didn't lead to any kind of like Democrats gaining ground outside of someone like John Fetterman, which shout out to Fetterman, hoodies for Fetterman. Which is, I think we can say is something kind of an outlier of the typical Democrats.
I think so. And we're going to bring Emma on just 1 second, but just like to your point, Cale, like this was, you know, CNN, which is just, we all know what CNN's like, but I mean, just listen to this clip and then we'll bring Emma on here. And I just think that it's so disastrous. At this point, it's sort of lost, but it's disastrous to me that people caring about the economy is somehow coded as Republican for the party. We all know what the Democratic Party is, but the party that, you know, pretends to be the party of the working class. I mean, just watch this clip for a second.
Is that the numbers in these exits do not line up with what we were seeing in the polling data going into this election about what people cared about and the order in which they ranked it. So we have had a lot of questions throughout this time about new voters, people that hadn't been in there before that were perhaps not getting captured by the polling. So maybe this is a sign that we're going to see a little bit more of that tonight than we expected. We obviously don't know yet.
And you know what's missing from this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top 5 issues? Democracy.
Oh, yeah.
It's not even in here. It's not to say that it's not an issue for people, but it doesn't even come close.
Well, I do think
that is that.
Yeah. I mean, like there's probably nothing better to sort of encapsulate some of the failings of the Democratic Party. It's like, you are supposed to be the ones who are people are showing up for, if they're worrying about their wages or things like that. But in this kind of upside down world, where it's like the Republicans aren't really want to do anything for working class people on this. But when they were seeing people say that they cared about the inflation and the economy on the exit polls, that somehow is coded as Republican, I think is really disastrous. But let's bring in another voice here. You know her from the Majority Report, good friend of the show. Really thrilled that she's spending some time with us after I know what has been a very long couple of days. Emma Vigeland, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to be back on. There we go.
And we also have to say of the newly launched Emma Sports Vigeland Network sports show.
Yeah, ESVN, right? That's what we call it for short. But yeah, check us out. We have a whole new episode live on youtube.com/ESVN show tomorrow.
Well, hell yeah.
I'm going to be on soon. I mean, we might have to talk about Colin Cowherd.
Oh my God. That will be fun.
Oh,
I just watched, like, in the spirit of that, really quickly, I just watched a 23-minute compilation of how wrong he's been with a bunch of takes. So I'm in the mood for that for sure.
One of the worst ones, he went on a whole takedown of the Texas Longhorns one time, talking about how they're not a historically elite program. And usually I don't get too worked up about, like, fellows who talk sports on TV. I was red as hell.
David's pawing at the ground like a bull.
I want to forge through my TV right now.
But as much as I would love to just talk football tonight, Emma, I know you've been talking about this a lot. We're going to zoom in on a couple of these races in states, particularly Texas, in a second. But we were just asking everybody to sort of give their general sense of how you think last night went for both the Republicans and the Democrats nationwide.
Well, I mean, honestly, for the Democrats, it was not best case scenario because I think that they're going to lose the House once all is said and done. But if they were to lose the House, I'm happy that, say, Sean Patrick Maloney lost. And we don't know what's happening with Lauren Boebert, but I just checked New York Times, and it's a 73 vote difference between her and that guy with more than Adam Frisch with more than 95% counted. I mean, and that's just one seat, but it's symbolic. So, I mean, based also on the way that right-wing pundits were reacting, you can tell that this was not a good night for them by any stretch of the imagination. And that's not just different voices that you hear online. That's Jesse Waters ranting about it on TV. That's Brian Kilmeade ranting about it on TV. Every corner of the Republican ecosystem is disappointed, except for probably DeSantis's camp, which the media is making into like this huge victory lap for him, meaning is the era of Trump over, as if any of these candidates are actual genuine proxies for Trump. But I guess we can cross that bridge in a few weeks when we come to it.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a fella up the road from me who's pretty annoyed that he's not involved more in the conversation of 2024 presidential candidates, Greg Abbott, because, I mean, I think I've told you all this before, but when he was doing his border stunts, he had the worst Fox News comment, because the whole reason he's doing that is to get Bubba's in like Tennessee worked up about Greg Abbott being somebody who's strong on the border. And the chyron on there was, is Greg Abbott the Ron DeSantis of Texas? Which is not how you want that to be framed.
Right.
But we'll get to all that in a second. I mean, like, before we zoom in on some of these races, I think that, like, I mean, I'll just say, like, dispositionally, like, I think I might have had a very different experience last night, particularly just because I was mainly watching the races here, which it was an absolute disaster through and through. But it's worth, like, looking at some of the positive things. As we noted before, we got Greg Casar winning here in Texas, who I think is going to be one of the more pro-worker candidates in the squad. Summer Lee also won, and both of these people, unfortunately, had relations with the DSA before getting elected, and those have since sort of dissipated. But still, we can, knock that up as maybe a half victory there.
Yeah,
I know less about the about how the Lee DSA stuff, but Kazar, it's like it's a situation where if it wasn't for shyness on Palestine, right? Kazar we'd be talking about as one of the stronger electeds in Congress. I mean, I know that's a big issue, but
it's 100% is a big issue, and it's why I totally understand what happened politically, because if you drop Palestine now, you sort of drop it forever. But I think that it's fair also to say that it feels like a huge wasted opportunity, because unlike some of these other people who come into DSA after, he was a member who got elected to city council here, he's been in it for a long time, and to lose that as he sort of is getting skyrocketed into Congress, I think is something that's very disappointing. But something that's disappointing, for the DSA is not necessarily the same thing as for the progressive movement at large. Right. But we also have Delia Ramirez in Illinois, Maxwell Frost in Florida. So there's more people who are going to be in Congress who are on that kind of younger progressive left, which I think is a victory. South Dakota expanded Medicaid, which we love to see. Nebraska raised its minimum wage to $50 an hour. Illinois voted to ban right to work, along with electing the radical socialist Pritzker. New Mexico's expanding funding for education. California, Michigan, and Vermont enshrined abortion rights, and Kentucky and Montana voters also blocked attempts to ban abortion on the state level. That's the thing that I think is worth noting too, that we haven't brought up, is the role of the Supreme Court decision on abortion on these midterm elections, because while I think the Republicans really fumbled the ball on kind of, kitchen table issues, to use a cliche, like the economy, it does seem like abortion is something that I think, if you look at the polling, is wildly popular and accepted in this country. I don't think we should shy away from that, even in places like Texas. I think that also played a huge role in sort of preventing this from being the, quote unquote red wave.
Yeah, I think it really did save Democrats to a degree that I didn't necessarily even anticipate when it first was handed down. And it gave Democrats something to run on writ large in terms of just a uniform message, which they struggle with largely, right? The Republican Party has significant and formidable message discipline, and the Democrats only fall into that kind of thing, and that's really what happened here. And also, I just was watching Jesse Waters on Fox News, who was ranting about how people don't hate Joe Biden like they hated Trump, or they hate Obama or the Clintons. And honestly, it's true. Biden, he doesn't engender the same kind of response, partially because he's not a black man, nor is he a Clinton, where they had a media operation, basically Fox News, it's part of the genesis of it, and other conservative talk radio that had been building a narrative about them, and they gave them a ton of material about their corruption and stuff. And she was a woman, so these are the kinds of buttons that you can push as a conservative commentator, and it really riled people up to vote against them in 2020 with Obama, for example. But Biden, he's just kind of mixing up his words. He's old, and the worst stuff that they get on him that normally they feel like it's kind of a very similar pattern that they use, right, with trying to build a narrative about a candidate, is just the Hunter Biden tapes, and everything in that is just Biden telling him he loves him. There's just no there. So no,
I didn't mean to cut you off, but I will have to say, you should, if you ever come around, I'll take you for a drive, and you might feel a little differently about how hated Biden is. But no, I totally get you on a national level. It's not the same kind of visceral thing that people had against Obama, Hillary, or even Trump in the other context.
Well, there was that time where Biden said something about the student loan debt relief, and all the the GOP pundit Twitter was and it was clearly him not getting it right. He was speaking as if it was passed through legislation and not by executive order.
Yeah.
And it's motherfuckers, we just had 4 years of Trump. We know that, you think he got everything right? It's sure, Joe Biden doesn't know where he is sometimes. He still passes things that we like.
Yeah,
What his conclusions.
it is pretty incredible that like we're gonna now nitpick Biden's ability to coherently talk about judicial procedure or like legislative procedure or whatever. It's just that was not the standard applied earlier.
Yeah. Although, we'll see, entering a competitive Democratic primary next year, so we might be back in it. Just a quick thought on abortion before we keep moving on that. I mean, I think it's like you, Em. I mean, I also, my initial take to overturning Roe v. Wade was this is probably going to be something that Democratic voters care about, and it's not going to be a mobilizing issue beyond like the core base. So it's not bringing in new voters. I think that turned out to be a wrong prediction or a wrong assessment. That and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, like we're saying, I mean, abortion is actually like pro-abortion is actually a much more majoritarian dominant stance in America. That and the fact that like the right has been so successful in rolling back abortion rights is not really anything to do with the success of those pushing it or like the strength of them. It's in some ways the lack of a left, that like we don't actually have anything that can effectively fight against the right that has been pushing against abortion rights, because it's not capital, it's not business. In fact, like most like major corporations are totally fine with abortion. They're either they're kind of agnostic, or they're pro, because actually it's going to be less costly to just have or let like their employees have abortions rather than having to deal with maternity leave, with like replacing employees. That it creates all these extra burdens and costs on them that they probably wouldn't want to deal with anyways. It's the religious fanatics. It's like this weird little concoction of like extremists that get smuggled into the right-wing coalition, and that have been they've been rewarded with the judges kind of also kind of being both obviously pro-corporate because it's the Supreme Court, they're all pro-corporate, but also the far more reactionary social stances. Whereas like if you compare like this country to Ireland, for instance, which actually has far more regressive social stances on abortion, it's a much more socially conservative country. They expanded abortion rights because it went through the labor movement, because it was the unions that were pushing that. And the fact that we don't have a labor movement, basically, I think is the more telling explanation of like why the right gets away with this, and also why when the right oversteps by repealing Roe v. Wade, it actually harms them electorally. Because there's if this was like something business cared about, they would have like fought much harder on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, and it pairs with why Democrats had success with that issue versus why they did not have success with inflation,
right?
Which is that they only kind of came to a corporate price gouging argument when their hand was forced and they saw it reflecting negatively in the polls. Warnock tepidly brought it up in the debate with Herschel Walker, but it was not central to the Democrats' messaging in the lead up. And it's like, we have been dealing with this inflation for months now, and that there is a broad understanding that that's happening. So the reason I don't think that was said that publicly is because that makes some people a little bit nervous. But the Democrats were, just based on the Republican extremism and the religious fanatics stacking the courts, behaving with the respective urgency that the minoritarian party would behave with. I say that a lot, but that's how I feel like you can understand the modern Republican Party. And that being handed down before the election, it just did give them an opportunity to have a clear message that wasn't going to piss off any of the people that pull the strings in the party, not in a Soros way, but in like a capital way.
Well, in the way they think Soros does it.
Right. Well, right.
Well, I think it could be worthwhile to zoom in on a couple of these places. And if you don't mind me taking a little bit of privilege here, I do want to focus on. Sorry, Matt. Yeah, you had.
Well, I was just going to prompt you. So I was expecting a wipeout. I mean, I kind of got what I expected about out of the Beto thing, and a wipeout on the border. Did that come to pass?
So there were 3 seats in particular in South Texas, and in fact, Cale a couple of years back. Matt didn't want to hear my answer to that, but a couple of years back,
I'll hang up and take my question out.
Yeah. A couple of years back, I don't know if you remember, Cale, after the 2020 elections, we did a little video on what's happening in South Texas, because there's been a lot of really worrying warning signs there, particularly because the Democratic Party has refused, especially on the national level, like statewide in Texas. Like, this is not to absolve them of blame for this stuff. It just is a complete disaster from the county to the state level everywhere. There's been a real lack of interest from the national party to invest in South Texas, which has allowed the Republican Party to start, getting more and more support there. Not necessarily in the way that's like those districts are all flipping to a Trump, for example, but in a way that more people there are voting for Trump than you would ever expect to be voting for a person like Donald Trump. So the GOP in Texas has really been focusing on South Texas. And there's been a lot of narrative going into this about these 3 South Texas races. And in the 3 that were really being covered, and there was a lot of media about, the Democrats were successful in 2 of the 3. The unfortunate thing, right, is that the races that we're talking about for our side, people who consider themselves to be Democratic socialists or progressives. Henry Cuellar wins. Vincetti Gonzalez, who's another fairly conservative Democrat, not as conservative as Cuellar, but more of that kind of like, we need to run more moderate candidates in that part of the country, won. And Michelle Viejo lost to Monica De La Cruz, which, in fairness, that was a district that was gerrymandered to sort of create an opening for the right wing. But it's also like, you shouldn't be losing races in South Texas as the Democratic Party. So prevented like the big negative story. But I don't think it's something that I don't think we should be feeling too confident, because the fact that these were even like close and we were even worried about them, I think really does sort of signal some worrying signs about where politics are going in this state. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but in Texas, Latinos are now the largest group in the state. They are the largest group in the state of Texas. So there's been all this hope for years. I remember when I was young hearing people talk about this, 15, 20 years. I'm talking about like 2000, 15, 20 years, Texas is going to be solidly blue, because white people are going to be marginalized as a voting bloc. And, Democrats are going to be able to win across the board. And we're not seeing that yet. Now, like across the board, like Latinos tend to vote more Democratic, but it's not this kind of overwhelming win that I think a lot of people who live in DC expect it to be. And before we like expand a little bit, because I definitely want to talk about the Beto thing a little bit more in depth. What is worrying to me is the fact that, as I said earlier, there's like Cuellar wins, Vincetti Gonzalez wins, and then the argument is we just need conservative Democrats to make sure that we don't lose races. Michelle Viejo had been pleading with the Democratic Party to just put a little bit of money into that race, to do some ad buys, to do some billboards, because the Republican Party on the state and the national level are swarming South Texas right now. They're investing all of their money in trying to flip this area. And it just goes into something that I think the reason these are vulnerable in the first place is a lot of voters in South Texas, regardless of their race, feel like they aren't appreciated by the Democratic Party. A lot of people feel like they've been ignored for a long time. And to do that to Viejo is really frustrating, especially because obviously, she was more on the progressive side. She was somebody who was pro-abortion and things like that. And I think I don't want to speculate too much, but I think there was a tactical decision by the National Democratic Party to make the argument that they want to make, to sort of refuse to invest at all in that race.
I mean, I'm not shocked to hear that. The theme of the Democratic Party is prevent defense, not to use another sports metaphor, and it's been that way for my entire lifetime. And a lot of what that entails is not just like a messaging failure where they don't verge on like more populist talk until the 11th hour, until their hand is forced, but it also includes a kind of operating strategy of protecting incumbents at all costs, which is maintaining a lead as opposed to going for it or trying to get a more comfortable lead, taking some risks on that front. And they find that to be usually incumbents tend to be, based on the construction of the Democratic Party, more conservative. But when that isn't the case, we know which way they break, and it's always with the more conservative candidate.
I want to bring this up just for some fun shit for a second, because there's sorry, I'm trying to be light, but like I'm very frustrated about what happened here last night, because I'm stoked. Myra Flores, if people don't know who that is, very, very far right kind of Trumpist candidate, lost. But just to remind folks, the Democratic Party did a kind of Pied Piper thing with her initially, letting her win so that she could present herself as, so that she could expose herself as like the crazy lady that she is, and the Democrats could win. Now, I will give them their credit. They won. They didn't lose the seat here. But I find it to be an extremely dangerous game for the fucking Democratic Party to be playing. We remember, for example, their position towards Trump during the primary. But this was what she tweeted out after the results last night. The red wave did not happen. Republicans and independents stayed home. Do not complain about the results if you did not do your part. And just for my folks who might not be familiar with the political geography of the state, that's Elon Musk's friend. Elon Musk publicly came out and claimed that he voted for her. So you should remember that too. I don't think we have to, explain to our audience how awful Elon Musk is, but that's when he's talking, when he was tweeting out the other day about how we need balance in Congress. Yeah, that's the balance that he wants to see there.
Well, I'm sure he'll be voting for the Democrat running in that House district if the Republicans take back the House next time around.
I'm sure he voted for Beto, right? Because Texas has been so dominated.
You've got to split your ticket.
I'm actually independent, but
that's what the founders wanted.
So watch this,
though. Gorka.
I think most people know this, but it was a disaster here in Texas for the Texas Democratic Party, I would argue. This is their kind of cheeky response to the results last night. New header photo just dropped. I wonder what it's going to be. Maybe a sweet picture of Beto holding people and thanking them.
Cuellar? Oh, God.
They have the Myra Flores tweet as their thing, which I can't tell y'all, if you don't know about what the Texas Democratic Party is like, a better encapsulation of what they're like is to continue their losing streak. They have not won a statewide election in Texas since 1994. I had 2 years of my life under Ann Richards, and that's been it, right? And they have a horrible night last night, and they're over here gloating because the crazy, I should be nice about my words, but the person who is, an election denier, far right Trumpist, lost a seat that she should never have been in the running for in the first place. That's where their mentality is.
Right. Well, this is for them. This is finally their strategy coming to fruition of we can win against the Republicans because they're actually extremist crazies. Like they're the most insane, crazy people possible. And that is what the argument has been for a very long time, and it usually doesn't pan out. And to the extent that it did pan out last night, it's like they still lost.
Well, it's what's the narrative last night? The narrative is that they didn't lose that is like the blue wall. You know what I mean? Like that is a part of Texas that's blue every time. They didn't lose their like base, and they're celebrating because of that. I mean, that's really wild to me.
No, that's like bumping the difficulty on Madden down to rookie and being like, look, close game, huh? Pretty important.
I mean, the Florida and Texas Democratic Party should probably just log off of Twitter for the next week. But there needs to be some sort of kind of reckoning with these social media interns. They're in way too deep, and this extends to like sports teams and stuff like that. Like too much memification of this kind of crap. It's so artificial.
So I want to spend a little bit of time on the Beto stuff with y'all, because I might be filling some of the blanks here, but here are the final results. In the national profile, a lot of people thought this was going to be really close. A lot of people thought it was going to be close or better than this, at least. But if you're looking here, I mean, Greg Abbott won 54% of the vote. Now, before I get to this next slide here, I just want to remind folks, Beto has national media profile, a pretty sizable like grassroots organization behind him, right? For better, for worse. And he broke fundraising records in Texas. So you can't make the argument that's typically made. It's like we weren't able to raise enough money to beat like the Republican machine. This is 2022. This is the race that just finished yesterday, right? And y'all don't even know who this person is, I reckon. But in 2018, Abbott won another election against somebody named Lupe Valdez, who got 42.5% of the vote with no national profile, without having $77 million fundraised to Beto. I'll just put that up again for folks if you didn't see. Beto 43 versus Abbott's 54. And it's just, I want to pick my words carefully here because, like, despite what some people accuse me of online, like, I'm not a Democrat. Like, my heart doesn't flutter with the rise and success of, you know, political figures like Beto. But as somebody who lives here, somebody with my family's here, I care a lot about what happens here. And you're seeing the destruction of my home state. It's becoming more and more unaffordable. Abortion is banned in the state. You're seeing school children be murdered brutally with no repercussions from the state when it comes to the complete failure of our security apparatus here. Like, it's extremely worrying to see somebody be able to raise this much money, get the excitement that he has, and just lose across the board. Now, I will say that, like, it makes a point, not to be too self-serving, it makes a point that I've been making for a long time. The Texas Democratic Party have had two strategies for winning. One, the Republicans are so nuts that eventually people are going to show up and they're going to vote them out, right? And there's truth to this. Like, it's wild. If you look at like the policies on the books in Texas right now, and you look at public polling, something like 15% of Texans support the total abortion ban, right? This is not a popular position. Guns, it's a little bit, you know, closer, but open carry, which we have, you don't have to have a permit to be able to carry around a gun around the state. Extremely unpopular, not only with Texans across the board. Majority of Texans oppose it. The police oppose it for obvious reasons, because it makes it very hard for them to do their job, right? The point here being that, like, it doesn't matter how bad it gets. You know, you have to run on something that's going to motivate people. And the second failure has been this kind of demographics is destiny thing, where it's like, if Texas stops being a majority white state, then the politics are going to change, which is wrongheaded on a lot of reasons. One, there's a big difference between maybe not liking people in office and voting for somebody else. Two, there's this kind of monolithic understanding of people where it's just like, you know, in Texas, not trying to make it sound like a utopia or anything like that, but like, we're neighbors. We like go to the same football games on Friday. We live next to each other. And why is it surprising that people who work in the same place, live in the same communities, can sometimes be enticed by the right wing? You're seeing that happen, where the right wing is able to sort of, you know, pick up votes with people who maybe folks in DC don't think are ever going to vote Republican, but in practice in Texas are. You know, so it's one of these things, like, they're waiting for Godot, to use a literary reference, right? They're waiting for this gift to be given to them. That is just not happening. And it doesn't matter how much money they raise, it seems. It doesn't matter how much national profile they get. This political movement, the Democratic Party here, is just losers across the board.
Yeah. I mean, just two comments maybe. The first, just on the demographics is destiny. I mean, this is like just a germane point, but race does not predict anything about your politics, not a single thing. And like, all of when you see like racial, you know, when they break down the exit polling of, you know, this race or this category of people voted this percentage, it's largely actually just geography. It's not, there's nothing about race, because it's a fake category. So there's nothing about race that actually imparts like politics to anyone. It's about where you live, who you live around, what is your situation, your neighborhood, the associations you're in, whether you're in a union or not, the status of your work laws, etc. Like, it's the geography. But regardless, I mean, I think with like Texas, I mean, we were talking about this before, David. What did Beto run on? What was Beto's like pitch about inflation? What did Beto have to say about you know, cost of living? Like, these are the issues that were dominating leading into this election. And I think, again, what we started off saying about the difference between opinion polling and exit polling, you know, you probably could have gotten a lot more people to actually turn out if you dealt with the issues that were relevant in the opinion polling. That again, Democrats got saved because of this, the situation with abortion, because of just kind of the absurdity and like the actual ridiculousness and kind of extremism of the right. But they still lost because they had nothing to say on cost of living, on inflation. And you don't have to go Bernie Sanders. I mean, you should go Bernie Sanders, but like they can't even meet us halfway on this.
Yeah, I mean, from the outside, go on, Matt. Yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, do you feel like? I feel like the centrists look caught though. Like, there's a lot of recrimination about, like, New York, for instance, that, hey, can we shut up about these cities being in like crime-infested hellholes? Because that's actually just helping Republicans win upstate. Like, and you see the strength of all like the sort of progressive left, like. This feels, and I haven't been around that long. I'm about to turn 34. But it feels like the first election I've been like, you can't really blame the left for this sort of loss. Like, it seems like there's the narrative is set that, hey, can we like relax on buying into every head fake that Republicans throw our way? I mean, look at Florida too. Florida, sorry, Emma, I'll let you go in a second. But Florida,
no, it's okay.
I mean, Christ, a fucking Republican independent guy, and then Val Deming's like flashing her badge, like, Go ahead,
and Herschel Walker flashing his, but to your point though, Matt, about the Democrats being unable to blame like the left this time. For the most part, that's true. But I literally just saw, I know you guys, like, you introduced it to me, Matt. Derek Davison said he just turned on MSNBC and Claire McCaskill was railing about how socialism
a loser if you've never seen one. Like, it's just sorry for people who don't know. Like,
loser. Yeah. And so they're a one-trick pony. No return to it. But like, to your point, I don't think that it has the same salience right now in this like vacuum of democratic ideas, and in this opportunity where Republicans are so associated with Trump that they can't escape the brand, rightfully so. Democrats should be trying to put their foot on the gas, right? Like, this is when you see a weakness in your opponent, you take everything that you can, you take advantage of it. And I do have fears that they're kind of just, we're going to focus tests, mega MAGA trickle down on a national level. We'll retread the same candidates like Beto O'Rourke or Charlie Crist, like, who are now just professional losers at this point. And then Abrams with the added baggage. I wonder if there's some crossover that you can kind of compare, maybe how the well-knownness of Abrams and O'Rourke might have hurt them because a narrative has been constructed against them. But yeah, what's your take on that, actually, David?
No, I mean, like, well, what's really wild to me, because what was really wild to me, like, in the election, like, the ads that you were getting from Abbott were like telling his life story, like, about how he got injured when he was young and he never let it hold him down. And it's like, this guy has been governor of Texas for 8 years. It's sort of like ridiculous for him to be doing like, I'm Greg Abbott, welcome.
And get to know me ads.
Get to know me. But you realize a lot of people have moved in the state in recent years. And I also think that's another Democratic mistake where they think that all the people who have moved here are just California liberals. Unfortunately, and I will admit, I do not like these people when I meet them. I talk to people all the time who I think are the biggest freaks in the world because they'll say, like, I moved to Texas because I like Greg Abbott and what he did on COVID-19 or something like that, which is psycho. But like, there's no doubt about it that, like, the idea that everyone coming here is somehow like a big liberal trying to flip the state is wrong. I think there's a decent amount of them, particularly people who are moving to like Austin and the big cities and stuff. But like, when you look at the influx of people, I think it's wrong to just assume that they're all people who want to vote for the Democratic party. But like, yeah, no, I mean, the thing is about Beto going into the election, right? Just to be kind of neutral on this, is that everyone had their mind made up about Beto because he is a national figure at this point. Yeah. In a way, even locally in Texas, that Abbott is not, which seems sort of crazy to say, but I think Abbott had a bit of an advantage being able to define himself for people. But I want to make sure we get to these other things. So I just have one more thing to bring up about Texas, because it matters. I think it matters for us across the board as we're trying to build up our form of democratic socialist politics in this country, because it was a big part of the Bernie Sanders campaign, for example, which is we're going to get people who don't typically show up and vote to come out and vote for us. And I always make this point about Bernie that I think that primaries are a very bad way to test that strategy, just because it is in most states, it's very hard for people to vote in primaries. They're complicated. It's not, as simple as showing up to a general election. But that was a Bernie Sanders strategy. I think that's something that people on our side definitely should be trying to build. That's what I want to see. But another one of these kind of mythologies, along with the demographics is destiny, along with, all these other things, is that Texas isn't a red state, quote unquote. It's a non-voting state. And if you just get, higher voter turnout, then you're going to win. And I think there's, truth to that in the sense that, like, I think Beto would have been done better if the turnout was higher than it was. But there was a really interesting piece in Texas Monthly by Ben Rowan called "Sorry Democrats, Texas Isn't a Secretly Blue State." And I won't go through the whole thing. But one, I think it's really important to note that despite what you might think, the Republicans are very willing to play this game too. And they've been doing get out the vote stuff with non-voters, and also find that a lot of the Texas State Democratic Party, which isn't surprising knowing how horrible they are, their voter data is bad. Which is like a very funny point, but it's really off. But more importantly, he goes and he interviewed some of these voters, non-voters, and different kind of politics. I think to say these people are not. I mean, liberals in the word I would use, so maybe it works. But like some people are like pro-gun rights or things like that, and they're saying that they're they can't be, they won't vote liberal or whatever. But like, here's what some of the people who don't vote in Texas were saying to him. And I think this is a very important thing to know. So one person, Mario, who's 27 years old, voted for Obama and is in fact very knowledgeable, talked about some of the like Dodd-Frank and financial regulations that they want to see. But they're not going to vote in this election. Quote, "I just believe that none of the candidates offer anything and actually go through with it." Another person said there's been no real change. They voted for Democrats their whole life, and they don't know where the money's been going, which again, you see the failure of governance there. This one is an interesting one because this is where they say that these voters are maybe right-wing. But I think that we could definitely win these people with like a pro-worker, left-wing, Bernie Sanders style movement. Tim, a compressor operator in Pecos, told me that Democrats have a lot of good stances that are good for the general public. Corporate taxes, unionization in a kind of backwards way, race issues. But O'Rourke had lost him. The whole take your gun thing is just too intense. So like when you talk to voters, and I think there's parts of these that are unique to Texas, but I think it's across the board. It's not that they don't care about issues. They are pessimistic. They're depressed. They think that politics is not something that's viable. It's not something that's worth spending their time on, because if the guy who they might like wins, it's not going to improve their life. And I think this, more than anything, right, this is like a failure of the Democratic Party, but I also think it's a real challenge for us in our movements to overcome this kind of, feeling of abandonment that a lot of people have with engaging in politics, because we can go there and we can say we want a just transition. We can have all the policies right. We can go there and we say we want higher minimum wage, etc. But a lot of people just do not believe that showing up and voting is going to change their life for the better. And like, that's been one of the things that's scariest for me, I think, trying to move forward, is that like, we have like the kind of prototypical, like I can imagine them right now, like the perfect Texas labor candidate. And it's just like, I don't think that that's going to be enough on its own. It has to really start somewhere different in people's communities that can motivate people to show up.
Well, you have an entire like media, like ready to be like, well, see, this person didn't turn out, even though you did this thing. Mm-hmm. Even though you did the bipartisan infrastructure bill, even though you did student loan debt cancellation. But I think it's important to note that youth turnout did soar. And also Tim Ryan, who came out against Joe Biden's debt cancellation, caught a big L. So I would just point that out too. And maybe it's not exactly cause and effect there, but I would I'd suggest it anyway.
What sticks out to me with the Beto conversation is that, one, I mean, I feel like nationally, at least when it comes to Texas, people associate him with being stricter with guns, right? Than you normally see in terms of politicians coming out of Texas, which, if that's the first thing that comes to people's minds, okay, we have a bit of an issue with some of the voters that you need to activate, right? And that's going to attract a lot of fundraising, and he has a fundraising apparatus in place. I guarantee you that the Texas Democratic Party saw that as a massive boon for him, and why he would be a good candidate to do this again. But the fact that he had a fundraising machine in place, but we see that there are countless cases about this, and the one I return to a lot is Amy McGrath in Kentucky, where money just poured into a candidacy that was entirely empty. And I'm not accusing O'Rourke of running a similar kind of campaign, but you have to, one, be able to have the oxygen to create your own narrative if there isn't one already in place that's going to be favorable to you. And then also, if you have a narrative about you in the state that works, you have to be able to expand that to others. And it doesn't seem like Beto, it was already written for him, and like sucks for him. I get it, but you're not entitled to something just because you have these advantages.
Well, and you can also, like, just really quick, just to add to that, his out-of-state fundraising was off the charts.
Oh, of course.
When you compared in-state donations to out-of-state donations, I mean, it wasn't even a contest. Abbott has more money in the bank than Beto, but Beto was obviously, a national candidate for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think, Beto did craft his narrative to a pretty good extent, I think. I mean, part of it, part of the contrast that I would make is to his campaign with Fetterman's, insofar as both were doing the whole kind of meme-y, kind of like online spectacle, trying to get the video clip to go viral. Fetterman, taking a much more kind of like comedic approach, O'Rourke taking a much more serious approach, but a similar kind of like, let me like expose how like degenerate and awful my opponent is by like a big online campaign. I think the answer is that doesn't matter, actually. That like the bigger, more substantive differences are the actual issues that they both ran on. I think like most voters are fairly competent. Like they might be not well informed on everything going on because they don't have the time or the interest, because they actually, I think the part of the problem is that they actually are right when they say that politics doesn't work for them. It's to the benefit of elites, and in most cases their vote doesn't really matter. In fact, and no single vote matters, but like especially in a lot of these situations, they have a much more rational and much more legitimate case than the left when they say, actually, this doesn't work at all. Like that we're kind of the idealists that come in and say, actually, no, politics could be good. Actually, we could actually get something out of this.
But then what's the way out of the trap there? I generally agree that I think that, like, I'm not going to be here and like, wag my finger at somebody. But there has to be a solution to this to try to build the politics that I think we all want to build.
Yeah, if I knew the answer, like,
yeah, totally, I get that. It's a hard question.
Very, very readily sharing it. I think my gut reaction is the fact it's two things. One, it's like the left has to take voter and just broadly kind of working class de-alignment more serious than we do already, and I think the left is coming around to this. That this is kind of the defining feature of the working class, just in the advanced capitalist world, that it's been increasingly demobilized from political participation. Brazil is maybe a little bit of an outlier case, the more we kind of understand that election. But again, the PT and Lula are also kind of a bit of an outlier case. But the point is that voter, working class de-alignment is a very real phenomena that, like, you can't just come back. The left just can't reappear to the extent that it even has really reappeared. It can't just reappear right now and say, actually, we can have all these good things, because their actual experience of the last 50 years has been, no, actually politics does not work. So so this is, I think, like the positive case would be, and this is a very limited case, but I think like Bernie Sanders in the first three primary states of 2020 where it wasn't just media ads, it wasn't just name recognition, it wasn't just stump speeches, it was intense door-to-door canvassing for a year with armies of tens of thousands of people descending on these states and convincing people to come out and vote. And I think that actually probably did move the needle as far as getting people to move in, in a more like optimistic, progressive direction. Working people, poor people actually thinking politics can make a difference. And obviously it wasn't in droves. It was a squeaker in Iowa and New Hampshire. California did well, but like still it's a small sample size of the entire population of California. So like Bernie, I think, gave us something. At the same time, I don't really think any left anywhere in the world, aside from maybe Brazil. But again, I think they're in a slightly different situation and that's a whole other conversation about why. But for the most part, the working class of the advanced industrial world is not voting. And just to kind of cap this off, Matt Karp had a funny comment that I don't know if he's right or not. He might be right. He might turn out to be right. We'll see. But his kind of assertion was actually the results of working class de-alignment over time, of becoming less politically active, dropping out generally, might actually be good for Democrats in the long run, insofar as the voting base actually becomes more well-educated, more wealthy.
Mm-hmm. I think what we need, just going back to the Lula thing, is that, where I think Lula won that presidential election is he was giving a big ass speech to a bunch of people, and he makes the, good points about like, Bolsonaro's bad, working people deserve dignity. But then he said, but you also deserve a beautiful steak with the fat dripping off the side and a cold beer. The crowd just goes absolutely wild. And I think that we need a little bit more of ability to speak to that on our side. But
I mean, you're making me hungry now, so you've certainly like spoken.
I definitely
to that.
I got the beer. I need the steak. But I mean, in the last couple of minutes, I mean, like, I think probably one of the most interesting Senate candidates is Fetterman.
Right.
He's somebody who I think we need to be careful on like the Democratic social side of overstating how in he is with us, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think that there's going to be some tensions, but I think that you are reading politics all wrong if you don't see this as an extremely positive victory. But I'm sure you've talked about this ad nauseum, Emma, but I'm just curious, like when you see Fetterman's victory in Pennsylvania, state that all of the pundits have been sort of, pushing as like Pennsylvania is becoming a right-wing state, etc. How are you reading the Fetterman thing?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not right-wing in the results, given what we've seen out of, and I'll get to Fetterman in a second, but more broadly, Shapiro was called so early in the night, centrist Democrat, but still a broad rejection of Mastriano, who's a January 6er. And then in positive news for like the squad and the just additions of more leftist-minded people into Congress, you have Summer Lee, who defeated a record amount of AIPAC money in her primary. And then I found out this today, defeated a Republican who had the same exact name as the person who held on to that seat for years before, the retiring Democrat. So the exact same name. So she's overcome a lot with like, she was in the state Senate as well, connected to labor, takes that seriously, which is really important. And then you have Connor Lamb's old district, I think it's PA 17, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. Another like fairly lefty candidate, DeLuzio. I saw that he refused to comment on the Pittsburgh Post Gazette story because their workers are on strike, which I thought was like a really encouraging development. And I think you can see this kind of, or those two candidates really, as an extension of that appetite for that kind of politics in Pennsylvania. And that Fetterman's at the top of the ticket. And some of it, I feel like the media portrays it. They overstated a little bit because of aesthetics, I guess, because he's
sorry. Can we put our hoods up while we're discussing Fetterman, please?
Sorry,
I feel left out.
I mean,
that's on you, David. You gotta get a hoodie.
I literally don't own one hoodie. Maybe.
So now, hopefully, as Jimmy Dore said, a working class person won't punch me in the face. But it's a whole different saga. But like we can critique what some of the things that he pivoted towards in the general, including just I love fracking for some reason. Also, I love Israel. But this is also about being strategic and having like an intelligence about it, and knowing that that was a calculation that his campaign made. They felt it was necessary, and in the end, look, he did have the victory, and he will be one of the better senators, I imagine, in the Senate.
So the Israel stuff, there's no excuse to make for that. But on the fracking, like, I think that there's something this is one of the reasons that I think that I like Fetterman. Like, I think we certainly should be getting rid of fracking. It's horrible for the environment. The jobs aren't the best, etc. Right? But what Fetterman's criticism is that, like, without a plan, like, he was coming from a place like, we need to have some kind of system of just transition for workers, right? Which I prefer much more than, for example, a candidate who would be very quick to say, let's ban fracking, and would just say to people who work in those industries, good luck, learn to code, right? Yep. So with Fetterman, it's like totally like, we want to eradicate fracking, but like, that's somebody who's actually coming to that equation from a headspace that I very much respect and want to see much more of, particularly as we, push for more decarbonization. I think a lot of people on the green left do not take seriously that we have a duty, like, we're talking about changing the entire system of how we, power our society. And then all the people who work in that, like, we have a responsibility to figure these kind of questions out. So I definitely, I disagree with the kind of like being, presenting yourself as maybe being very pro or whatever. That's a position that I can sleep easy with when you're coming from it from that position versus just sort of like an ultra, fuck oil and gas workers kind of thing, which you see a lot in the green movement.
And I would, and look, I try to be as bullish on, like, you have to support. I see, if I want to take a candidate seriously as a leftist, it's where do they stand on Israeli apartheid? I 100% agree with you. But to me, it's not as much of like, it was such a clear pivot to me to stave off a wave of AIPAC money that I see the strategy behind it. We'll see where he stands now that he's been elected, but maybe I'm thinking
it's an issue with a certain it's an issue with a certain momentum of its own. I mean, and even major human rights organizations are starting to be more explicit about certain labels they're willing to use. So I feel like a guy like Kesar too, with the exact same thing. Like, I hope that they're able to take stronger positions as it becomes clear that, like, especially, I mean, AIPAC, they're not just like spending money against the like squad members. They're spending money against fairly standard Democrats, and hopefully, they can be pushed on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys on this issue, but at the same time, politics is priorities, and I'm a vulgar workerist, and so whatever we can do to build up the power of the working class. And I think, like, to David, your point, I mean, I think part of what makes Fetterman interesting and makes him a different Democrat, whatever, however you want to call him, there just isn't really enough of a coherent left in the United States to be like, he's on our team or not. Like, even with like former DSA candidates that are no longer DSA candidates that are now electeds, like, DSA doesn't have any like actual mechanisms to hold people accountable anyway. So it's unfortunately more often than not symbolic. The New York electeds are a little bit different, but it's still limited. The point being that Fetterman is, I think, different insofar as it's just a very kind of obvious populist pro-labor candidate that, again, to your point of like how he dealt with fracking, I think it's in some ways is taking that issue far more seriously than most of the left, honestly, the Green left especially, that I think because they turn ultra insofar as they say, this is what the transition should look like. This is what a decarbonized future should look like. And politics is not really about the end stage so much as it's, sorry, I'm going to sound very Bernstein about this bullshit, but it really is the process. It really is, well, how do you actually do politics? How do you build the coalition? Who is actually a part of your political coalition in order to move forward? And I think, we're going to have to deal with the fact that we have a highly fragmented and decimated working class in this country that doesn't act as a working class. And we're going to have to build the working class as a coherent, fighting, militant class. And it has to start with prioritizing the interests of workers and actually taking what they're saying seriously and taking their job security seriously and trying to build up unionization and not fight against, workers who are unionized already. That it's going to be an incorporation and it's not going to be perfect. There is no perfect political process to come out of neoliberalism that's going to be super, super strictly just left. Like, it's going to be really messy. And so I think Fetterman, I don't know what he thinks about. I don't know how he thinks about political change, etc. But I think just it's an objective, good, positive push in the right direction of a kind of workerist political wing of within the Democratic Party. That he's going to be an important pull alongside, people that I think, we can just kind of unabashedly say like are like our generals of like Bernie Sanders, like that. It's going to be in that corner, and that's what matters right now.
And I should just quickly add that the Senate in and of itself is an undemocratic institution that should go by the way of the House of Lords and should be obsolete and rubber stamping things. So like there are also not just limitations for like what is possible politically for the kind of candidate that needs to win that amount of broad appeal, but also just the office of the Senate in and of itself, despite its immense power. It's like quite hostile structurally to the left.
No, totally. Well, I have one last question for our panelists.
Sorry, I have to jump in here. Just on this note of Fetterman, I do want to share this. And this is from Evil Roosevelt.
Please. Oh, yeah.
It's from Evil Roosevelt on Twitter, and we know it's hard to verify things on Twitter these days, but he shared this, which was still see people who think that Fetterman dresses down for effect, but 6 years ago my brother hit him up on Messenger to ask him to officiate his wedding, and not only did he say yes, but he showed up like this. That's amazing.
Because he wore a suit to that debate, and I know he's still recovering from the stroke, so that was part of like probably why he was feeling uncomfortable, but it was probably the suit, honestly.
Yeah. The suit is what hurt the polling.
I'll have Twitter being like, he's stuttering a little bit after a stroke. Is this going to be the end? And everyone's like, why does he put on a suit? What a cut.
I know. It looks.
Where's my man's hoodie? That's what I'm.
Right, exactly. He was not in solidarity with us.
Yeah.
So I want to make one quick point, if I could,
Sure.
just because I've seen some people getting worked up about Fetterman and fracking. And I'll just say this. One of the most dangerous things that we're seeing in the green movement right now in this country is this idea that building a future that is prosperous for working people is something that has to come at the expense of the environment. A couple years ago, I think most people watching this program were very excited about somebody who was running for president of the United States, Bernie Sanders, who pushed forward a Green New Deal that called for massive investment in society, something that would create a lot of jobs, a lot of employment opportunities for people, and call for a just transition, a period of time where working people who work in extractive industries get paid as we utilize their experience and their knowledge and their necessary skills to changing our system to one that works for all people. And I just will say it's been very disappointing to me to see people who went a couple years ago going all in for Bernie now saying, fuck the working class. I'm happy with seeing their livelihoods go down in the name of green politics. It's frustrating enough because I find that to be politics that's really sickening, but it's even more frustrating when we realize it's not even necessary. Like, y'all are willing to do that, and that's really dangerous. If you're serious about decarbonizing the planet, don't play that game. But anyway, that's just my little quick spiel. I know we only have like 2 minutes left, but I want to ask y'all both, just really briefly.
Sure.
I know it's hard to make predictions, and we don't know the full results yet, but how do you think this is going to affect Sleepy Joe in the next couple of years of his presidency? Let's just assume, for argument's sake, that they hold the Senate and maybe and lose slim margin in the House. I'll go to you first, Emma.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it really is up to Biden what he wants to do after 2024, which I think will affect everything. But I was seeing on MSNBC, I turned it on this morning, and they were saying how this is validation that he wanted to maybe run for a second term. I think that's a terrible idea, but obviously that's a conversation not between him and his family, as they say, but between him and his ego. And he has to make a decision based on that. But obviously, I think it would be better for him to move on after this one term. I don't know who would be waiting in the wings, but in terms of legislatively, they're going to lose the House, and they're not going to be able to get anything done. But the slimmer the margin, I think the Republicans have less leverage to, say, tie Social Security to the debt ceiling, which could, like, if Biden really is feeling weak, that would cause that he could cave, and so the economy doesn't crash, like cut into Social Security, which is really a terrifying prospect. So the smaller the margins in the House, the better the chances that won't happen is. Having some like moderate blue state Republicans maybe defecting. But in the Senate, it's just like, this is what happened. We need judicial confirmations. So that's, hopefully we hold the Senate for that reason. But the agenda broadly is pretty much dead.
I mean, I basically agree with everything Emma just said. I guess the only thing I can really add, again, I think there's probably I think there's like a decent chance that like we might be entering a Democratic primary. I think like given like the fact that people overwhelmingly don't want Biden running again. There's been polling on this. The latest exit polling was it 2/3 or 3/4? It was like a crazy number of people that are saying would really rather Biden not run, which that might not, I mean, he probably is going to be running, even if it's a primary. I mean, I think like there's a chance people are going to throw their hat in, and we'll see, like, it's not going to be just like Obama, kind of, pushing everyone to the side when he was president and no one gets to challenge him. I think the party is far more fractured than it was, 8, whatever, however many, 2, 3, 4, whatever, how many decades ago Obama was in office. Yeah. It's just the insanely long amount of time ago that Obama was in office. But I mean, my take, again, kind of just sticking with what I was saying a moment earlier, just being a vulgar workerist, is like the most important political thing that's going to be happening in the future is the Teamsters contract coming up on July 31st. How that actually plays out, as far as if Teamsters go on strike, if FedEx workers, Amazon workers, USPS workers are also in solidarity, either slowing down the pace of work or also on strike. If other unions more broadly take the opportunity that this, and that's in the most optimistic. I think like the more predictable situation is that there's a strike, they maybe do okay and get a better contract, but it is a situation where it could lead to so much more. And that's not automatic. That's, if you're on the left, you should be, and hopefully if you're watching this, you're on the left, that you should be actively and actually trying to spend your time doing what you can to strengthen that prospect of Teamsters going on strike and workers standing in solidarity, and blossoming into a larger strike that actually, ends up fighting for more concrete issues that they could say, every single worker deserves certain rights in this country, whether it's healthcare or certain job security, et cetera. That's the kind of like political push that should be coming out of like massive national union efforts. And so, and Teamsters actually are kind of, have been and are right now among the more radical unions in this country. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I think that to me is the more interesting situation, and seeing how that kind of plays out and how politicians have to deal with that. And hopefully that is like an earthquake that transforms politics. But otherwise, I don't see, Biden doing much.
Yeah.
Dark horse person who could run. I'm just going to throw this out there so it's on camera. John Ossoff. Just throwing it out there. I
Do
know
we
it
get
would suck.
another Buttigieg kind of thing?
It would suck, but I just feel like that's just what my spidey senses are telling me.
Yes, that's not a bad guess. Well, I appreciate
Stole
everyone
it from
taking
my
time.
sister, honestly.
I have one last indulgent thing for Emma.
Yeah.
Very soon, Cowboys Packers. Who do you got?
Oh, the Cowboys. I mean,
Can we get a Let's Go Cowboys from Emma on the
absolutely
pod?
not. I could against my like former favorite quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. God, what has he done? But they look like shit.
They look bad.
The Packers. Something's broken, and it's like that. When quarterbacks fall off, they fall off quickly. And I thought it would happen with Brady, and it is to a degree, but it's more precipitous with Rodgers, who was the MVP last year. So I think the Cowboys are going to win, and I bet they'll cover. I don't even know what the line is, but maybe I'll make it one of my locks tomorrow. We'll see.
There you go. Emma's a lock on the Cowboys today and for the rest of the season.
Nope.
Cale, Emma, really, I do appreciate y'all both taking the time. I know it's a busy period, but really a lot of fun. Hope to do it again soon. And folks, show's not over. Matt and I are going to be jumping over in the post game in just a couple minutes.
We're going to be talking about the plot against Donald Trump. All these rhinos are circling with their knives, and we're going to be getting deep into it.
And horns.
And seriously, if you haven't done it yet, become a patron. You get 2-to-1 content. You get the post games, or you get the call-in. You can call us at 1-940-289-7234. Matt and I also do a bonus episode. We do Mark's readings, dive into a lot of things that we don't cover on the main show. So definitely consider supporting us. And to all of our patrons, we love you so much. And everyone else, we'll see y'all next Tuesday.
See you, folks.